So for episode 2, I wanted to cover this topic because I don't think it's talked about enough, especially when we're digging into the nuances of intake dynamics. And on a side note, videos like this are fun for me to make because I get to help people understand what's happening under the surface. I think the car community just needs more knowledge and data-driven takes, as opposed to conjecture and opinions, especially when we're talking about engine performance. Now, before we go into the nuances, I think we need to start with the basics. I think at this point, most of us know that hot air ain't great for engine performance. Hopefully we can all agree on that basic premise. Knowing that cold air is better for engine performance, we really need to know that there are only 3 main delivery systems that bring air into the intake manifold. That's going to be your OEM intake, your short ram, and your cold air intake. I'm intentionally excluding ITBs or individual throttle bodies. There is a lot to ITBs to set them up properly, so I feel like they deserve their own video. Now, one misconception I see brought up a lot is that OEM intakes are cold air intakes. If you've been around cars long enough and you care about this kind of thing, you'll notice some have snorkels in the engine bay, some have snorkels in the fender. For this video, I'm strictly focusing on engine bay fed OEM intakes because that's what I have presentable data on. Now, that specific style of OEM intake is very common. It's not just pulling in air at or below ambient temperature. You have a running engine with loads of electronics, 160 plus degree coolant circulating through hoses, as well as your exhaust, all just radiating heat. If you've seen episode 1 on intake fundamentals and testing, you'll remember this graph. This shows the air temperature plotted on a graph during a 30-minute trip with my OEM intake. I used this test rig which I created and ran a DS18B20 temperature sensor, which is accurate to a degree Fahrenheit and logged the intake air temperature every half a second. Now this is where we get into the recovery time portion of the video, and what you'll notice is the intake air temperature never actually came back down, not even for a second. So when we're talking about what's important with this data in this context, it's that the intake temperature never recovered and the intake was actively lowering performance over time. We can see how recovery time is more important than peak temperature in this regard. You'll see the sharp increase, which is the highest spike in temperature, and there's 2 things to note here. The first is that even sitting at the light, it still never got as hot as the OEM intake. The second is that it recovered immediately, so it's almost like the temperature increase never happened at all. The intake did increase air temperature, that's thermodynamics, but it increased the air temperature when it didn't matter, when I was at a red light, blasting music and checking my email. Another takeaway is that you aren't going to stop the intake temperatures from rising. Unless the intake is completely separate from the engine bay, no amount of foil tape will stop the forces of convection. Now, to understand convection, we only need to understand hot pockets. If you put a hot pocket in the microwave, it comes out hot. Amazing. The same thing is happening to your intake. This is why recovery time becomes more important than trying to keep the temperatures low. If you start adding layers to shield the intake from heat, you can add thermal mass and insulate the intake. Think of it like wearing 9 jackets in the wintertime. If you start getting hot, you need to start peeling away some of those layers. This is why you see a steady increase in temperature with the OEM intake. It's thicker and has different thermal properties over something like thin aluminum. So recovery time really becomes the main factor when it comes to performance because you're not looking for one good pull. You're looking for consistency and being able to do pull after pull with minimal performance loss. Now, if we look at the short ram, we can see the same thing that happened to the OEM intake, just on a different level. Compared to the OEM intake, it got hotter and was at the brink of detonation. Luckily, the setup was running E85 and was able to mitigate this, but a normal 87 octane motor might start seeing the timing being pulled by the ECU at this temperature level. Had the temperature recovered and start lowering like the HRS, this would be a non-issue because you'd see recovery time stabilizing at the intake air temperature and keeping the engine performing as intended. So when we talk about performance as a whole, you have to ask yourself, are you chasing consistency or are you just changing parts because internet? If the answer is consistency, then you now have the knowledge to make a better purchasing decision. If the answer is internet, hopefully this has helped you go in the right direction. Intakes are a really nuanced subject because there are a lot of factors, but when we talk about performance and consistency, it really only comes down to temperature control. If you bring in hot air, performance decreases. If you get an intake with good recovery time, temperature really isn't an issue anymore. To give you some final numbers, just know that every 13-degree rise in intake air temperature, you lose roughly 1% of your overall horsepower. Like I said in my last video, the short ram, if attached to an H22A, brought performance from 220 horsepower at 77 degrees ambient to about 206. This is just a rough estimate because calculating air density in relation to pipe diameter and length is just too much math for me to do on any given Sunday unless I'm being paid for it. Now, all of this isn't to say that a short rem will grenade your engine on a summer day, because it won't. But if you're after the best performance, no short rem is going to be effective unless it extends out of the engine bay, which would be a cold air intake. So if you're looking to maximize what you already have, a cold air intake is just the way to go. And that's all I really have for you guys. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments and I'll answer them. Other than that, I'll see you guys in the next one.